what was the CRIC? What does the acronym mean, and what was it?
So the CRIC was the Composite Reserve Infantry Company, and it was just an amalgamation of reservists to form a reserve company within a Reg Force battle group. So.
What was the significance of that? Why was it a big deal?
Well, it was the first time they'd ever done anything like that, since deploying to Korea or, maybe World War II. I really couldn't tell you the historical significance on that, but, to actually deploy to a theater with a reserve-led reserve company, and it was a milestone, really, and it looked like that was an excellent opportunity and maybe a model for deployments in the future.
So what did you and others in the unit think when you heard about this concept, that this was how they were going to go on this tour to Bosnia?
Well, I thought it was it's something that I'd been preaching for years, ever since I'd been overseas in '92 and '94, and I looked at it as an excellent opportunity to show what the reserves can do, and so when I heard about it, I was, and on top of that, I just wanted to get overseas again too. So I was really looking forward to doing it.
What about other people in the unit? How did they feel about it? Like how many embraced it?
The majority of the guys just wanted to get overseas. There's a lot of, for the majority of them, it was their first tour. For myself and Jamie Moreau and Steve Malfont and stuff like that. We'd already been overseas a number of times, but for a lot of these kids, it was their first tour overseas, and that's what they wanted. So it wouldn't have mattered to them if it was a CRIC or if they were a one of in a rifle company with the battalion. They just wanted to get overseas. That was it.
So what you've already been twice. What any issues with your family? You're married at this time, right?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Not yet. We're
girlfriend. Any issues with people that you want to go a third time?
Well, my folks have been having an issue with it, on every tour. Darlene had already been to Bosnia in 98, 99 on that tour, and so I had the opportunity of being home for a tour, and then me going was just another, it was just status quo at that point there. So
can we just do like a little diversion here and just talk about that?
Sure.
Being the guy left at home when she went over to Bosnia, what was that like?
That was interesting. So you don't you certainly get an appreciation of how difficult it is to maintain those communications. We're talking 98, 99. So we had they had the phones, and it was writing letters, okay, and the odd email. I'd receive a letter, I'd write a letter back, but Darlene was way better at that than I ever was. She'd send me letter after letter after letter, and then I would just try and respond to each letter that she sent, and postcard and stuff like that. But she came back on leave because we were just dating at the time. So she came to Alberta on her HLTA, and which was kind of funny because I was working up in Wainwright at the time. So I actually had to go to Edmonton, pick her up from the airport, brought her back to Wainwright. We hung out in Wainwright for a couple of days. Then my leave kicked in, and we spent the rest of the time in Calgary. So I thought she got ripped off personally, but she seemed to be pretty happy with it. So.
But what about the whole, you joined the Army to see the world, have a life of adventure, and now your partner's doing that, but you're stuck back in Canada. Was that difficult, that aspect, just getting your head around that?
Yes and no. Like that was it was tough in that respect because like I've always wanted to get overseas, like and deploy. But it was her turn. Like I can't go overseas and not reciprocate, right? And so there's just a realistic aspect to that as well, and it played in my favor when we went to Bosnia and then when I went to Afghanistan as well, because I was able to use that as leverage to. So, I hope she doesn't see this interview, but she probably will.
Okay. So going back to the crick then. So you're volunteering for that. How many guys from the Highlanders?
Oh, man, there was a lot. There's over a platoon. I want to say around 40, maybe more than 40, came from the regiment to the crick. We were the largest contributor to the crick for that tour, by far. So
how were you received when you get to the battalion? Which battalion did you go to, and how were you received?
To the 1st Battalion, it was typical. It was normal. There was we were at a period of time in the Canadian Armed Forces where we didn't have the same tempo as we did in the 90s. So things were slowed down quite a bit. Guys were really anxious to get overseas. They're really anxious to do the job, and then you see 150, 200, reservists come in to the. I think that's my phone. Yeah, sorry.
I just asked you that again. So, which battalion did you go to, and how were you received?
So we went to the 1st Battalion, and that was it. We got there, I think, April 2nd, because it was right after the Reggie birthday, anyway, or really close to the Reggie birthday. But like I said, we're at a point in time with in the Canadian Armed Forces where we didn't have the same op tempo as we did in the 90s, and so things had slowed down quite a bit. So there are a lot of guys who are anxious to get overseas, and when you're in battalion and you go and you see 200 reservists show up on a Monday morning to muster parade, there was a little bit of friction there in that respect, and then we just consumed all the resources in the battalion. When you've got 2 separate pay systems, when you've got 2 separate administration systems, for a Class B reservist, because we were all put on Class B contracts at that time. 2 separate pay systems. So like there were guys who just weren't getting paid. I remember we were in the field and they paid us all by cash in the field while we were on exercise in Wainwright. We had to drive guys to banks like all over the Wainwright area because they don't have a Toronto or a TD Canada Trust in Wainwright, so we had to drive to the nearest town that had it, had that bank, and so on. So there's just a ton of issues in terms of that, and guys in battalion who were we could walk into the BOR or talk to their company clerks or stuff like that. We're just consumed with all this administrative burden that we brought to the battalion. I wish I could say it was our fault, but it wasn't. It's the system. But not everyone sees it like that.
So So you get there, you arrive en masse. Is there some kind of a selection, or have you all been pre-selected?
Oh yeah, so there, and I don't have the exact numbers, but I'm just going to say there's 200 reservists for 124 positions. I may be wrong on those numbers, but it's irrelevant. There was more reservists than there were positions, and because of that, there was a very rigorous selection process. If you got hurt, you were gone, and so guys did things that they pushed themselves to the point of breaking, and they broke, and they continued to go because they wanted to get overseas that bad. That was a very frustrating part of that whole process. And then consistently, like, you've got people in leadership positions who are like, well, you wouldn't be doing this, if you just joined the regular force. There's that attitude as well. And it's like, I don't think that's the message that we should be trying to get across. We're all infanteers. We all signed the dotted line, but we're to coin a phrase from someone else, we're a second-class citizen in our own army, and it certainly felt that way. So
just so I can be clear, you're doing like a selection here that's just for the reservists at this point, or are you churning with the entire battalion?
No, it's just the reservists.
So what kinds of things were you doing?
Well, we were just doing ranges, just doing regular workup training, working up to company dry and company live fire. So that was all fine, but I remember digging in, and there was leadership from the battalion who showed up, and the sergeant major and the OC were there, and because I was working company headquarters as the ops sergeant, and the sergeant major got pulled away, and I could hear, like, they were standing right by where I was digging in, and the sergeant major was basically getting a jacking. You have too many guys here. You need to start cutting guys, and the sergeant major going, "What do you want me to do?" And he's like, and basically, he was told, whatever it takes, cut these numbers down. We can't take all these guys, and it was an impossible position for the OC and the sergeant major to be in, because that was the driving attitude, or the driving force during that selection training. And then we sat down and we evaluated every single soldier, and it wasn't the way to do business, and any reservist from that who was sent home, like, and got out of the army, I would not blame him one bit. It was not the way to build a cohesive company, because it was literally, guys were, when anyone fell out of a march or something like that, it was like, there's my position, that's me going overseas. So
it sounds pretty cutthroat.
It was extremely cutthroat, and like, how do you rebuild cohesiveness? How do you rebuild teamwork? How do you rebuild trust in your leadership when you go through a process like that? It takes it takes strong leadership, and you know, and it takes trust on part of the soldiers as well. We had to rebuild that right from the very, once we formed that company, was the main goal of the leadership, especially the NCO Corps, in that company, was to rebuild that trust and you know, with the soldiers, with the officers, and that I don't ever want to go through that process ever again, and it's a bitter point for a lot of the guys who went through, who had to experience that, and I don't blame them one bit.
Were the criteria clear? I mean, what the expectations were and who was responsible to decide the final composition of that company, or was it just kind of loosey-goosey as you hit the ground there? Do you remember?
I wasn't privy to that level. That would be, you know, you'd have to talk to the sergeant major at the time, the OC, the company 2IC, and the OPSO would be probably the two guys to talk to on that, for those answers.
What do you think? So maybe not knowing that, but based on your experience, what do you think would have been, in hindsight, a better way to decide who should be in this company?
Just designate, just task units. You know, Westies, you're going to form a platoon. You know, LERs, you are going to form a platoon, and build those organizations and show up, you know, with that platoon, right? To be completely honest, you know, we were in such austere mode with the Canadian Armed Forces at that point in time, and I'll tell you a story about the Treasury Board coming to visit us later, but it was absolutely shocking talking to these Treasury Board guys while we took them out on patrol. I couldn't, you know, it was at that point in time I realized that D&D does not, there's a real eye-opener. D&D does not run the Army. It's the Treasury Board that runs the Army. And, you know, and they hold the purse strings, and they make those decisions. And it was very, but that's a whole separate conversation, that one. So
it sounds like what you're saying, just to read between the lines here, is that ideally have the guys show up for the positions, and then you work on team building and bringing people up, as opposed to cutting people off and just getting rid of them. Is that kind of your approach?
Yeah. Well, if you're tasking units, okay, you bring that leadership, you bring that esprit de corps, you bring that teamwork already. You know, then all you got to do is put it together in an organization, foster that esprit de corps, and build on it from there. You know, it seems fairly simple for me, you know, because we had multiple tours coming up, because the 2nd Battalion was rotating the 1st out, so they're building another crick right after that. So why not, if that was the way that they were going to go, which is what they did. They sent another crick company after us to rotate us out. If that was the way that they were going to go, then why not just task the units? You know, we need a platoon, or, you know, or just task BC, you know, 39 Brigade, and just go, we need a company from 39 Brigade to go over on this tour with the 1st Battalion. We need a company from 38 Brigade to go over with the 2nd Battalion, you know, and stuff like that. And then the odds and sods, okay, if they can't fill from, you know, from those brigades, you know, then they outsource it to 41 and 38, or, you know, vice, or however the rotation goes. You know, but there just seems to be a real just no one wants to go that route or look that way. They just everything's piecemeal, you know.
So even though there were 40 Highlanders at the time, you were going as individual augmentees. You weren't the Highlanders weren't called on to provide a platoon.
No,
right?
no.
Just that's what the numbers look like.
That's right.
Okay. So when you finally get to the point, what's it like, or I guess what kind of state is your company in when you get to the point where now you're going to start working with the rest of the battalion?
Well, you know, it's a LAV battalion. We have no LAVs. So, you know, a lot of our work was, basically on our own. Like, it was bizarre. Our platoon commanders, working in the ops cell, okay, they're like a month before we deployed to the field. It was like, we want your range instructions. We want this, for the ranges that we were running while we were in Wainwright and stuff. And so the three platoon commanders, which were three of the best officers I've worked with, like they were bang on. Like they produced fantastic product and everything went forward. And then I'm sitting in the cord, while we're sitting in Wainwright, and they're looking at the and I remember looking at the platoon commanders because they were like, I still haven't received your range instruction for this range tomorrow, and the young lieutenant is sitting there going, oh yeah, it's almost done, and then they're actually like, do you need an ambulance or do you need med coverage on this? So, yeah, I need that, and blah blah. And they're like, drawing out of this young platoon commander from the battalion what is needed. And meanwhile, like, the three platoon commanders from Delta Company are just sitting there going, what is going on? Like, we turned ours in like a month ago, and you're just getting around to it now. Like, there's two very different standards. At that, it's fine. Our ranges ran well. All the ranges ran well for the most part. But it is what it is. So.
At what point did the commanding officer have to scale back a company?
Oh, I can't remember exactly what the date was, but I remember that day very well.
Yeah, so what was that like? Just describe that.
So, we come out from muster parade in the morning, and we'd heard the rumors that they were talking about axing a company. They were going to scale back the mission to 2 rifle companies. And so we form up. We're out on parade, and the CO comes out, and he in front of the entire unit, including Delta Company on the far flank. He's like, he goes, I have to cut a rifle company, and it's unfair, but I'm being forced to do it. But I can't cut Delta Company because I'm being forced to take these guys, so I have to cut, one of the other 2 companies. And so we cut. That's when we found out that one of the Reg Force companies wasn't deploying overseas, and then things went really downhill from there in terms of morale and stuff like that in the company lines, or in the battalion lines. And we were like, as the leadership in the company, we were like, looking at each other like we couldn't believe he was saying this on the muster parade, and like that. That set the tone for pretty much that whole tour right there.
How did it play out, let's say, in the shacks between regulars and reservists after that decision?
Well, we were, for Delta Company, we were sitting in 222. We were so like the whole entire reserve augmentation was all in 222. So and we weren't like thrown into the shacks with the rest of the battalion. So the guys just kept to themselves for the most part, and that there is, and I get it. There was a lot of animosity towards Delta Company, and I don't blame them. I thought it was a very poor decision, but again, this wasn't a decision made by D&D. This was a decision made by Treasury Board. They were the ones who cut the person years off the mission. But even having said that, I think there's a better way to break that news to the battalion than like that, and in that tone as well. So
you said that set the tone for the rest of the deployment, basically. So what was, just in general terms, what was the tone in that?
It was an us and them. It was an us and them attitude for pretty much the entire tour. It was the task force, or it was the battle group, and Delta Company, and working in ops, and sitting in the on the back wall, listening to how things were being shaped and stuff like that. It was very evident. It goes to show that when there's a scarcity of resources, we unfortunately tend to look in on ourselves. It made for a very, very difficult time.
Well, you mentioned the scarcity of resources. You weren't equipped with the same vehicles.
No.
Tell me a bit about that. How was Delta different from the rest of the battle group?
Well, we were in Ultices, which was fine because given the mission and what we were doing, Ultices provided a much greater freedom of movement for ourselves. The rest of the battle group were operating in labs and Lab 3s and coyotes and stuff like that. So just restricted with the with the size of the roads and stuff like that, and just the tonnage of some of the bridges and stuff like that. So there's a lot of places that we could go that the rest of the battalion couldn't do. So that being said, I think that we were fine in that respect. The one thing that I thought was especially, and I have to give kudos to our mechanic for Delta Company on that tour, or the mechanics that worked there, because they were phenomenal. They kept those Ultices on the road. Those things were running, 18, sometimes 24 hours a day, because a patrol would come back and they would just refuel them, start them up again, and be out the gate again, on an next patrol. But when we first got on the ground there, the unit that we took over from, where someone was kind enough to pour gravel into the fuel tanks, and so like the mechanics were literally pulling the fuel tanks, emptying out gravel in some of these vehicles, and having to get new fuel filters and all that into them, but just ridiculous, what was going on. But they did unbelievable work. They kept those things on the road, and they kept us able to do what we're being tasked to do. So,
did you think that your workup training made the most of, I guess, the institutional knowledge from all those previous tours in Croatia and Bosnia during the fighting there?
I wouldn't say that it did, but I wouldn't say that it didn't. During our workup training, like right in the middle of it, or well, maybe more to the beginning of it, we had the G8 summit. And so we ended up deploying to Kananaskis for security at the G8. So that was a big, like, there's a lot of focus on that, and understandably so. But with that, we had to reorientate, do the G8, and then when we finished the G8, then we redeployed back to Edmonton, and then we got back into the pre-training again. Personally, I think that the pre-training that we did for that tour was way too long. But I understand, that they needed us there to help out with the G8. So it's all part and parcel. So I don't really have any issues with any of the pre-training. But everything that we did was dismounted, which was fine, because that's what our bread and butter is. That's all we do is dismounted ops. But it would have been interesting and a great development for like our NCOs and stuff like that to be able to operate in a mechanized environment. Our officers, two out of the three platoon commanders were Phase 4 qualified. So it would have been, even being able to, put a platoon into each of the rifle companies for to do the mechanized operations, I think would have been beneficial. Not for the mission, but just for the overall development of the skill level in the company itself. So we had the time to do it. That was the thing. Like, we weren't short on time.
Can we go on to, what was the purpose of the mission at this point then? What's the big picture, and what are you doing? What's the company doing as part of that?
In terms of the mission, it was, just being that visual force on the ground, a visual deterrence, I guess, is probably the best way of putting it. Basically, we accomplished that through patrolling. Whether it's foot patrols, vehicle patrols, that was, whenever we showed up for a meeting in, at the headquarters, that was the first thing they wanted out of us was, what are your patrol numbers? Okay, what did you send out last week? How many daytime patrols? How many nighttime patrols? And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What always shocked me was the number of patrols that everyone else sent out, because, we would be, we'd be pushed to do, out of the teens into the 20s, but they were conducting, 3-4 patrols a week. And, it's like, oh, well, they're those other subunits are, concentrating on leadership training, and they're running courses and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, why aren't we running courses? But yeah, like I said, there were we'd have patrols come back, and what would change is the crews. They would just put a whole new crew into those vehicles, refuel them, and kick them back out the gate again. So we had the 2 platoons in B Hatch, and then we had another platoon that was absconded to do gate security over in Banja Luka. So, yeah, that was that.
So, sound like a bit of a double standard from your perspective on the ground then?
Well, I don't want to get into it felt like it, but it was difficult on the ops side to go to build a plan and then push that plan down to the 2 platoons that we had doing the patrolling, and they're just like, looking at us like, how do you expect us to get these numbers, like get these number of patrols out? Like, we just don't have enough guys. And but that was all part of that challenge. We were being leaned on by the battalion and by the battle group, and we're basically leaning on 2 platoons to accomplish those goals.
When you went to Croatia in '92, you're living in bombed out buildings, or at least that's when you first got there. What are your accommodations and facilities like this time?
Oh, they're top notch. We were living in ISO trailers. It was we had a gym, we had computer access. We had a D1 drop-ins. Everything was done. Like most of the defensive stuff was done. So we rebuilt. Just maintenance is basically all that was. Rebuilding the towers that we had in the compound. It was actually quite good. And the Canadian cooks that we had there were great. It's just that the one complaint about the food was the juice. And there's this, and I remember at the end of the tour, guys were just like, I'm sick and tired of peach juice. And the cook was like, he was like, what are you talking about? We never had peach juice. It was like, I think that's the problem right there. So other than that, it's it is what it is. The guys made the best of it. They made the most of it, and I think that we did a great job accomplishing the mission that was put forward to us. Unfortunately, I don't think that the company received the recognition that it should have. Like I said, there was a real us and them type attitude between Delta Company and the rest of the battle group, and
So I was surprised when you told me that the company wasn't 100% reservist. So who were the Reg Force? Who were the Reg Force components of this company?
So the transport sergeant. Okay, we start off with so the transport sergeant, the CQ, and then about halfway through the workup training, the sergeant major was a Reg Force member.
So tell me, how did it come to pass that the reserve sergeant major was replaced by a regular force?
So I mentioned earlier about the selection process, and they leaned on the sergeant major, and they leaned on him hard. And the sergeant major he was the one who made all the unpopular decisions about who was going and who wasn't. He basically did the dirty work for the QMSI at the time. He did everything that he was told and asked to do, and then after everything was said and done, they fired him before we went to Kananaskis for the G8 summit, and I couldn't believe it. I I had the privileged position of I was privy to a lot of conversations, sat in on a lot of meetings, and he never complained. He never, when he needed to voice his opinion, he never did it in front of the company or in front of anyone else. He was always up front and straight with that, and I couldn't believe that they did that, firing him just before we deployed for the G8. I look at it as an attack directly onto the NCOs of the company, personally.
So how you explained how the CO, made the previous public announcement decision. How was the firing of the sergeant major done this time?
He was told on a Friday, and we didn't see him after that. I think it was a Friday. I just remember seeing him in the parking lot, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm going home," and I was in shock. I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, they're replacing me with another MWO," and I was like, I was angry, and I was, I told him, I was like, "Well, you know what? This is dumb. Like, this whole thing is stupid. I'm gonna put in my 30 days. Like, I don't need to be part of this." And he's like, "Don't, why?" And he always maintained a very professional attitude, even in light of this. And he was like, "These guys, they need guys to be able to lead them, and if everyone starts jumping ship, then the crick is going to fail, and if the crick fails, then it's going to be, see, we told you." It became quite apparent, like, at that time, that if the crick failed, it would just be justification for, that the reserve just can't deploy as a subunit. And then at that point there, it was my mission just to make sure that it didn't, along with the rest of the NCO Corps.
So how did the rest of the company react to his firing?
Well, some guys were happy. Like, there were guys who were like, "Yeah, glad he's gone." There were other guys who were like, "Well, if they're willing to do that at this time, really, who is going overseas at this point?" Because by that time, we already knew that there's a whole company of NCOs and soldiers that were there, that were more than happy to replace anyone in that company, and then I think that it just, we knew, like, anyone in that company that that made a mistake, they were, like, literally everyone in that company was walking on eggshells, especially at a leadership level, because they're just looking to replace guys. And I think that the way that they did it, I didn't agree with it. It's one of the bitter points for me on that tour.
Was it ever explained? Has he ever explained to you what the grounds were for being fired?
For what they told him?
Yeah.
And made absolutely no sense. you know, they knew that they wanted this MWO in that position. And a very convenient harassment thing popped up, and that's what they used. And I was like, "Yeah, you're not going." Like I said, and then you know, nothing ever came of it, you know. And I think that was probably the most disappointing thing about it. So
do you want to talk? You said you want to talk about the personalities, since we're already talking about him and others. Like, so the people, who was there and what they've gone on to do since then.
Yeah. And it was one of those things that you don't actually, like, I'd never actually thought about. But I'd met up with Rob Peel, Captain Peel now, out in Victoria. And we sat down. We were having a pint in the pub, and of course, you know, we can't meet unless we the crick is always going to come up in our conversations. And he said something to me that really struck a chord with me. And then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, wow, he has hit this nail right on the head. He goes, how many, when you break down the crick, okay, you know, we had those guys who came back and they left the military, okay? They did nothing other than that. That was their the high point or highlight of their career or whatever, and that was it. And that's fine. But the number of chief warrant officers that came out of that organization, the number of COs that came out of that out of the organization, and who've gone on to other things, you know, is one example. The number of guys who went to CanSoftCom out of that company is notable. It's amazing. There is a level of individual soldier skill, okay, in that company that, you know, that is notable, and it is reflected in those numbers there. The number of guys who stayed in the military and went off to went on other tours like Afghanistan, and the number of soldiers that were awarded medals of valor and bravery and stuff like that, as an example. The number of soldiers that actually went and joined the regular force or stayed with their reserve units to go on to, you know, to the better improvement of the Canadian Armed Forces, I think is something that's notable. Just taking that into account, okay, I think shows the success of the CRIC itself. But we don't, it's one of the things that we don't track, I guess, in the Canadian Armed Forces, you know. But, you know, sitting there and talking with Rob and you know, talking about the individuals in that company and what they're doing now and where they've gone and stuff like that, and, you know, being successful in their military careers, being successful in their civilian lives and stuff like that, is notable. And you can't put a price tag on that at all.
Can you explain why?
I honestly couldn't. I just think that you know, we had some really good soldiers, and who were who met the challenges and performed extraordinarily well. Unfortunately, it's just not reflected in the report, you know, afterwards, and I think that's the real travesty out of the CRIC. You know, there was an incident that you know, where I was, you know, walked in on a conversation where the gist of the conversation was, okay, remember, the reason why the CRIC failed was because of the NCOs, the failure of the NCOs. I couldn't believe I heard that. It was very disappointing to hear someone saying that.
So what's the context for that conversation? Like, where and when did that take place?
Just before the medals parade. You know, Lady Patricia was there to present the tour medals to Delta Company, and yeah, there was the CO talking to the OC. You know.
So you're saying in the CO's headspace there, he thought the CRIC was a failure.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, as far as he was concerned, it was a failure. You know, I didn't see it as that. I saw a group of infanteers, reservists, band together and do a great job. And you know, another example of this is, you know, part of the, you know, I talked earlier about the patrolling. One of the other mandates that we had was doing the op harvests, the weapons collections. Okay, we did an operation. It was op Hydra. So we had we had Delta Company. Well, our 2 platoons from Delta Company. We had the other mechanized company, and then we had an American company that was attached to us as well. And so Op Hydra, obviously, the 3 different heads, right? And we conducted an op harvest operation. Out of that operation, the numbers were 98% of everything that was confiscated during that operation was picked up by Delta Company. And like, when we laid everything out on the ground for you know, just to take the pictures of it, and you know, it was impressive, you know, what these guys did. And part of the reason was that we'd been patrolling out there so much that you know, like a lot of the soldiers, you know, with the interaction with the locals and stuff like that, they picked up the languages really quite quickly, and they gained a lot of trust with the locals. So you know, a lot of times it would be you know, it would be people who would just be like, yeah, I know exactly, you know, and they would just bring us right to what they wanted to get out of their property. We had one lady who actually turned over her son's pistol. Now, her son was actually a cop with the Bosnian police, and she turned his service pistol over to the guys. And so like, they're like, check out this Glock, you know, and we're like, that doesn't seem right. And then this, you know, the police chief, you know, from BHATCH, and you know, he shows up at the front gate, and he's like, yeah, can we get our pistol back? He's like, yeah, no problem, you know. But
so I'm just curious, where is the company commander in this whole, you know, his sergeant major? You're in the company headquarters. Mm-hmm. Sergeant major gets fired. COs, you hear the conversation of the CO says the CRIC was a failure because of its NCOs. I don't know, can you talk a little bit about the company commander and sort of where he was and what he was doing in all this?
He was trying to keep everything together. That's I could not imagine being in his shoes. he's literally stuck between a rock and a hard place. That's all I'm going to say on that. I wouldn't want to be in his shoes, and at that time, so I'll just leave it at that.
Do you think, just to finish up on sort of the personalities, do you think because it was this kind of us and them, backs to the wall, but a largely reservist company, is that maybe one of the reasons why there was this kind of certain esprit de corps, perhaps?
Well, I think the esprit de corps, it transcended the regimental affiliations for sure. Sergeant Shannon from the Sea Force, he put together a T-shirt and it had all the cap badges from all the units on the back, and then on the front, we had the Fighting Maggots T-shirt, and obviously a derogatory term towards reservists, but we embraced it and we rallied around it, and you go out on exercise, or you go work and you'll see someone wearing that T-shirt still. I still wear mine once in a while. But it was really, I think, where we found that common ground, and where we really banded together to form a cohesive organization, because we knew that the only people that we could rely on were the guy left and the right of us, and that was that. And no one was there to help you. You helped yourself. You made things happen, and that's that.
What's the Treasury Board story?
Oh, okay. So we took the Treasury Board guys. They show up, and we take them out on patrol. And so we're running through the AOR, and so I've got one of the Treasury Board guys beside me in the back of the Altus as we're ripping around, and we got about, I think we had about maybe 6 vehicles in the packet to let these guys see the AOR and stuff like that. So anyways, we're driving along, and I'm talking to this guy from the Treasury Board, and he is, I'm like, yeah, we had to cut one of the rifle companies, and he goes, well, yeah, because, we're not paying for that. And I was like, oh, so you're the one who makes those decisions? And they're like, well, yeah, the Treasury Board, we needed money, and this is where we pulled money from. And so I'm like, so you're dictating operations now, And he's like, yeah. And I was like, wow, that is an insight I would have never had if I hadn't been sitting here talking. He goes, yeah, and the other thing too is like, this idea of, a guy getting a mortar course, and then he goes on to get a anti-armor course, and he goes on to get a pioneer course, and all this sort of stuff. This collection of courses, this is ending too. We got to cut all this stuff out because we need to save money. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, if a guy is available to go on a course, like, yeah, and he requires those skill sets, then that's what he should get. And he goes, yeah, don't need it. Mortars, that belongs to the artillery. And he's telling me this, and I'm like, and then right after that, that's when we saw the divesting of Pioneer Platoon and mortars and anti-armor and all that sort of stuff, and these big changes. Well, anti-armor was actually already being divested out of the infantry and sent over to the strats. And so the writing was already on the wall. So I knew, like, when I was talking to this guy, this was actually on the go. So anyways, we're talking, and I'm like, well, our equipment, like these Iltises, like these things are run ragged. It would be cheaper just to cut these things up for scrap metal and leave them here than it would be to bring them back to Canada. And we're talking about that, and he goes, these vehicles are fine, there's nothing wrong with them. And then that's when we had the fire in the one of the vehicles up front, and the whole packet like pulls over, and guys jump out, and the Iltis is like filled with smoke. And what had happened was the like just over time, the seat had made contact with the battery posts on the batteries underneath the seat in the back, and it lit the seat on fire. And and he's like, and these guys, the treasure board guys that were up in that Iltis, they were like, they're like, you did this on purpose, because they were talking about the exact same thing, and the section commander was like, in the vehicle, he's like, I didn't do anything, this is the state of the vehicles that we have, and we need to invest in a newer vehicle. And so anyways, I don't think they really enjoyed their time with us, but yeah, that was that.
Simon told the same story.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, you faked this.
Yeah, it was insane. It was ridiculous. Anyways, if I wasn't there, I wouldn't have believed it. But I couldn't believe the stuff coming out of this guy's mouth. Dictating policy within D&D because they hold the purse strings.
What I guess when you're done it all, when you're at the end of the tour, what's your frame of mind as you're coming home about what you did and what you might do next?
That was when, like, coming back, I made a very conscious decision that, I'm going to get my 6B sorted out. I'm going to, I want to be able to be in a position where I can make that change. I don't, one of the things that throughout my time in the military has been, I don't ever treat people the way I've been treated. And, I've tried to hold to that as much as possible. To say I've been like the best leader, I guess, would be, is a completely false statement. We all have our flaws and stuff. But treat people the way you'd want to be treated. And, the other thing too is that we're infantry, we're infanteers. It doesn't matter if you're in the regular force or in the reserve. It doesn't matter if you're Patricia, a Canscott, or Winnipeg Rifle, or Regina Rifle, or a Calgary Highlander, or an LER. Like, there should be a brotherhood there, and it's one of the things that I see that we're very fractured, and we're not fractured along those regimental lines in the reserve as much as it is in the regular force, from what I see. But we're certainly still fractured along the reg and reserve lines, which I think is very dangerous and detrimental to our operability. And the other thing too is that I think that we need to embrace the regimental system more than try and push it away. The regimental system is the reason and this is just me talking. It is the reason why the reserve has survived the way it has through all these years of austerity and stuff like that, to where we can actually deploy guys overseas. The regimental system keeps individuals from being numbers. The regimental system helps us keep care of our soldiers' needs, because you're part of that family. And with that, we need to transcend that sense of family from the regimental system to the corps level, to show that we're all infanteers. We've all signed that dotted line, and although our jobs are different in we got mechanized, we've got light, or not so light infantry, that we are still the only trade that holds ground. We close with and destroy the enemy in all phases of war, in all conditions. And that should be the thing that binds us together, But when I talk about resources, when they cut the budget for the Air Force, they stop flying, or they just don't fly as much. You cut the budget for the Navy, they just don't sail as much. When you cut the budget for the Army, you lose people, because that's the most expensive thing. And on an organization, when you have an organization that prides itself on people and developing leaders and stuff like that, it seems a little counterintuitive to what we're trying to accomplish. And I think this tour was the Road to 11 was a perfect example of that austerity. And just, how bad it can affect morale and the esprit de corps of an organization.
Do you? I'm just curious. Do you think that the CRIC? I think you see it as a success. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Do you think this could have been a model? Would it have worked in Afghanistan?
Oh, I think it would have. But then again, you look at Afghanistan. We had 3,400 Canadians deployed to Afghanistan, and the lion's share of that were on CAF. The pointy end of that, was actually a very small amount, outside the wire. Having companies of reserve infantry to augment those guys out in the sticks, like some of these cops and FOBs and stuff like that, could have. They were crying. They desperately needed infanteers out there to do the job, and I think we missed I think as a corps, I think we missed a phenomenal opportunity to really solidify our place in the Canadian Armed Forces, because we don't think big when it comes to operations. We're just too busy thinking small, because we've worked in at the company and the battalion level so often and for so long that we should have battalions overseas when we deploy, but it all comes down to I'm sure, like, there is leadership out there that sees that. You know, but we're again constrained by, you know, budget, treasury board. You know, what the mission needs this, but can you get away with this? On my SLP, probably one of the, not my SLP, my ALP. One of the best things I took away from that course was an Air Force lieutenant colonel talking about the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. And he used an infantry rifle company as an example. And he goes, you take an infantry rifle company, you got 2 platoons up, 1 platoon back, and you do an attack, and everything goes well. And that attack rolls through, and you close with and destroy the enemy, and you consolidate on the position and stuff like that. Now, when we analyze this, what did that 3rd platoon do? It's like, well, they were in the reserve. If everything went well, they probably didn't do much. And he goes, that's right. Was that attack efficient? Well, no. When you look at it like that, it's not. And he goes, that is the danger, because that is how bean counters look at the way we do business. Was it effective? Yes. You need to be able to articulate the effectiveness versus efficiency when you're talking to bean counters, because they have no concept of what a reserve force does, in that context. And this is where the real danger lies. And I thought about that, and he was absolutely right. We need to be able to articulate that. We need to be able to make those cases, when it comes to deployments and stuff like that. But we get dictated to us. This is what you have. Now make it work within those confines and those constraints, and the mission, literally the success or failure of that mission depends on the soldiers that you deploy on the ground. And now we understand why we have such a risk adverse, why our pre-training is becoming, has exploded. We did 3 months when we went to Croatia in '92, which was more than enough for what we needed to do. But we've gone to 9 months to go to Afghanistan. We spend a lot of money training. Maybe we should just use it.
Is there anything, any final comments you want to make about the CRIC before we wrap it up? Have you covered what you wanted to cover?
It was a success, wholeheartedly. Just trying to think now. I never talked about what happened to the Reg 4 Sergeant Major.
Oh, okay. Okay, what happened to the Reg 4 Sergeant Major?
So there is an ND that happened on one of our vehicle checkpoints. Soldier was from Delta Company was trying to clear a weapon that he just had no idea what he was doing, and he ended up loading around into this rifle and firing around, and it went shot it right into the back of the LSVW. So at that point there, the platoon warrant from that platoon, he did everything that he was supposed to do, and we brought everything up, and then when it got to the AJAG and the DCO and to the RSM, they were like, yeah, you know what, this, you know, if it was a C7 that he had the ND with, that's one thing, but this is it was a rusted, just a unmaintained rifle that he couldn't get the breech open on, and it was like trying to open up the bolt on it, and anyways, he fired a round, and they're like, yeah, you know what, this really doesn't fit the definition of a negligent discharge. You know, we haven't really done much in the terms of foreign weapons training and stuff like that. So maybe, you know, so they were like, yeah, you know what, scrap it. So they opted not to pursue charges through the NDA against the individual. So the weapon or the rifle in question gets thrown into the bin. It gets sent to all the confiscated weapons. They end up going to Banja Luka. They get cut up and smelted down, and that was that. Then that's when things changed. It was like, no, we're going to charge this individual, blah, 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 this, that, and the other thing, because some new information had come to light. I don't know what this new information was. I wasn't privy to it. But anyways, after everything was said and done, the sergeant major of the company, the Reg Force sergeant major that had taken over, he was everything that a sergeant major should be. He knew the soldiers. He looked after his soldiers, okay, because it didn't matter if they're regular reserve, you know, it was his company, it was his soldiers. And he went to bat for his soldiers. We came back from tour, and I found out he got charged under the NDA, and basically just ran right out of the, like, I was gutted after that. One of the soldiers that worked with me in the company headquarters, he ran into him and found out what had happened, and he'd left the army after that, and he was like, yeah, he couldn't believe it, that his own battalion treated him like that. And I think it had everything to do with how successful that company was. You know, I can't help but think that. You know, if there's ever someone with a grievance that should come forward, it would be him. But he wouldn't do anything like that because he's a stand-up soldier, and you know, the only way that, you know, people hear things like this is, you know, other people standing up and talking about it.
What was he charged with?
That I couldn't tell you. I just know that the whole thing went through. And the specifics and the details, I'd leave with the people who were involved in that.
Did the soldier who had the ND, was he charged and found guilty?
Geez, you know what? I can't remember, because that was right at the end. Like, that was right at the very, very, very end of the tour.
Okay.
And you know, like they were looking at the platoon warrant and charging the platoon warrant as well. Like the NIS was down doing interviews and with everyone, and it was a real mess for something that seemed as trivial as it was.
Can you just tell me one last thing? When you come back to Canada, just what was kind of like I don't know, not the breakup of this company, but just that whole transition? Like people you didn't have any TLD, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Right. So how did you come back to Canada and people just carry on?
Yeah, it was just dribs and drabs. Like, again, just like coming back from Croatia, there was nothing set up in place. You finished your leave, and then you were supposed to report back to the unit for 3 days or 2 days or something like that. And and a lot of there are guys who in not just in the Calgary Highlanders, but in other units who took those 3 days to process out of the Army. There were those guys. There are other guys who just didn't show up for it. There are other guys who showed up, and I know that a lot of soldiers use that time to make improvements in the junior ranks club at that time, and when you talk about, when I was talking earlier about guys, the guy who ramrodded that, he's a medical doctor now. It's amazing who you meet in the reserve force, but it just went right back as we got back in the spring, and so we were just rolling right into that stand down, and quite a few of us ended up in Wainwright teaching for that summer. I know I did, and then I was right back into university in September at that point.
So what's your mood when you come back? What's your your mood based on your sense of accomplishment? Are you?
I was proud of the way the company came together. I was very proud of the way that the company performed. I was impressed with the sheer will of the soldiers in that company, and the NCOs and the officers to work through adversity and the austere conditions that we were in, not so much in terms of environmental, but just in the day-to-day goings on of the battle group. I was very happy with that. I was very disappointed with the way things unfolded in that on that tour, and part of just leaving that behind. Part of that is just not following up with the company sergeant major as to what happened with him. I think it was. I don't think that was handled very well or appropriately.
The regular force.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, both of them. It seemed like you were doomed in that position. It set the stage for a lot of guys who the chances of you deploying overseas as a warrant officer or master warrant officer, especially as a chief warrant officer, is extremely limited. It's not in the cards for you. So speaking of chief warrant officers, we had Chief Warrant Officer Fletcher, who was injured overseas. The had that vehicle accident, and he had to get repatted home. Him and his driver, both of them were in very serious condition. So there's that. One of the things like that I've talked about is it sounds like every person on that in that company, or every reservist on that tour was the A team and top notch. It's definitely not the case. We had our problems in Delta Company. One of the biggest dangers you can have overseas are bored soldiers, right? And bored soldiers will, if there's trouble, they will find it. If there's mud in a white room, okay, that white room will be covered in mud. Troops are like that. We're no different in terms of what happened in Delta Company as what happened in the rest of the battle group. There was no, in terms of disciplinary issues, we had our share of disciplinary issues. But at the same time, there was a lot of looking for smoke, or looking for fire when there wasn't even any smoke. The rumor mill was unbelievable. At one point, they were. I got asked if we were. What the hell was it? We had a pet. I want to say it was like a pet bear or something like that, and in B hatch, and like there's just these outrageous rumors that were just flying around, and a lot of it, is just troops who were bored, oh, did you hear this? And things getting passed around like that, Anyways, you're always going to have that stuff. It's all part of the game, I guess.
Is we good?
Yeah, I think so. You're talking about stories, and I had a good one. I'm trying to remember what it was. But New Year's Eve was a blast. Went out on patrol with Steve Malafont and his section, and it's like the tracer rounds that were flying through the air that night was just comical, because it was like, it'd be like, by the time we got there, like we're on foot, by the time we got there, because it was just like, you'd see green tracer flying through the air this way, then you'd look behind you and you'd see red tracer flying through the air, and they're like, just hope no one gets killed, and that was about it. And you just walked around and said hi to everyone, and let the police do their thing, and it's just we knew that on New Year's it was going to be a mess, and it certainly was, but at the end of it, we knew that there was a lot of weapons still out there, a lot of automatic weapons, so that that just helped justify, that we needed to do more op harvests and stuff like that, because there's still a ton of ordnance out there. So
That was good. Thanks very much.
no problem, sir.